Has MLB The Show franchise gotten a little bit stale for you, and are you looking for new ways to be able to enjoy the mode? Well, this is the right video for you. Today I'm going to go through some tips and tricks to make your franchise experience better in terms of understanding the mode a little bit more, especially if you're a casual or newer player. And then for anybody, finding little things to make your experience more unique, more fun, more different, etc. Now, I've already done a video going over my settings and sliders. I'll leave a card at the top right if you're interested. That included my custom roster. It's one of the most downloaded on the vault currently. You guys should try to make it number one because that'd be sort of cool. But that's the name of it. Best Franchise Roster Octi. That's me. And then it has my PSN if you want to search that up as well to find it. So from there, you'll download your roster, and the next step is to pick a team. I always get asked, what team should I pick for my franchise? And it really depends on what style of rebuild you're interested in. If you want a real challenge to take one of the worst teams in the league, there's some good options between the White Sox, the Rockies, the Marlins, the Angels, deciding what to do with Mike Trout. Maybe you want a team who isn't necessarily awful, but is sort of stuck in no man's land. The Tampa Bay Rays are a really good option, especially considering they don't really have a stadium right now. And going into the team selection process for my series, the Rays were actually my top choice before the vote, and I was ultimately swayed. And I feel like I made the right choice for what it's worth with the White Sox. But going into it, I was very high on the Rays as a franchise team, along with Toronto as well, deciding what to do with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. You might not like the Astros, so if you don't like them, don't pick them. But I think they would be a sleeper good choice in this year's game. I think the Cardinals could be an option as well, along with the San Francisco Giants, who of course were my team last year. And then if you're looking for maybe a young, fun team who's on the verge of being a consistent playoff contender, I would look at the Tigers, the Mariners, the Reds, the Padres, the Red Sox. All would be options for that. We will use your Boston for today's video, and that's because their roster has gone through quite a bit of changes with my custom roster. The goal with the custom roster is to make many of the top prospects better immediately. I think most of the custom rosters in this game have the prospects' potentials going up. I haven't really seen an issue with the potentials personally, except for a few guys, but I think the overall ratings need to be higher. These guys get better very quickly in real life, especially flying through the minor leagues. Look at a guy like Roman Anthony, who was a high school prospect just years ago, and now he's on the verge of being a big leaguer. I think someone like him should be closer to big league ready because that's how the Red Sox currently view him. Again, we already talked about some of these settings in the last episode, but basically the main one here would be GM contracts. If you want to risk being fired, you can keep that on. The extra innings rule, the league-wide designated hitter, and then all of this. I like to keep it on manual. I like to have full control, but if you don't want full control, say you want the CPU to do your scouting, you can keep that on auto. But we'll talk a little bit more about scouting and whatnot a little bit later. We'll also dive a little bit deeper into the critical game stuff, although we did talk about that in the settings and sliders video previously. So with that, you're just about ready to roll for your franchise mode. You've selected your team. Go Sox! We've got our settings set up, and you want to do everything on manual, let's say, but you don't really understand how the roster works, because in baseball it is quite complicated. It's not just one team, it's an entire minor league system below. It's a little bit different compared to, say, NFL or NBA roster building, which obviously we go through on this channel as well. As we look at this Red Sox team, I think they've got some good young pieces. Obviously, Garrett Crochet in the rotation, but you're going to have to be smart with him because he only has 2 years under team control. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the budget later. And then in terms of the rest of the pitching staff, you've got some intriguing young guys like Tanner Houck, Carter Crawford. There's not a lot of young guys, though, behind them. So getting pitching to add to the farm system could make sense. You want to be smart with how you manage your young guys. You want them in the big leagues, but if they're not playing well, it's not worth it. Brian Bayo might be a bad option because he signed a long 6-year extension. The Red Sox are not going to send him down. A better example off the top of my head would be someone like Drew Thorpe, who we've gotten to see in the White Sox series so far. He's been a baller for us. But in the case of him, he's one of the top 5 rated pitchers in this rotation. You certainly want him to be a starter. But if he's not good enough, it might not be worth it. You might be better off having him progress in the minors. So it's really the level that he would currently sit at. Then in terms of offense, shout out our guy Blake Sabol. This team has a lot of pieces offensively. Some quality big league bats, such as Tristan Casas, Rafael Devers, Jarren Duran with his tennis racket, Ceddanne Rafaela, Wilyer Abreu. Some good pieces here. But we also got to look at the young guys. The Red Sox have some really good young prospects, and again, it's about managing these guys correctly. Is a guy like Christian Campbell ready for the big leagues? I think based on his offensive ratings, the answer would probably be yes. But if he doesn't play well, you might want him back down in the minors. Understanding your farm system is also going to be very important as well. Obviously, the Red Sox have some studs here at the top with Roman Anthony, Christian Campbell, and Marcelo Mayer. It's not a particularly deep group, though. Nobody else has higher than B potential. You've got a great group of three at the top, all of whom have great value. You might not want to trade them at all because they're so good. But behind them, there's not a lot in this system, and you're going to have to find ways to get better in that department, particularly through the draft, unless you're looking to sell off some pieces. Let's talk about managing your budget now. This is obviously a big deal in baseball. There's no salary cap, but there's a team-wide budget. The Red Sox have a big budget. They're able to spend a lot of money. If you're looking for a challenge in that department, there are other teams like, say, the Marlins, who don't spend much money. It's going to be harder to retain guys on big deals. It's going to be harder to sign free agents. Look at the lack of money they're spending. Only one guy making more than $4.5 million. Only three guys making more than $2 million per season. So it can be a real challenge managing your budgets. And if you're using a team like the Marlins, you have to be especially smart with drafting and developing talent. Obviously progressing guys through the farm system and then picking and choosing which guys you look to extend long term, because unlike a team such as Boston, you don't have money that you can just throw around. In the case of the Red Sox, they've been able to get out some young guys their extensions early, like Rafaela Imbeyo. They gave Bregman the big deal. They gave Devers the big deal. They gave Trevor Story a big contract. But since you're using all this money, there's not that much available in the budget long term, and theoretically, you're not going to be able to pay all of these young guys going forward. Garrett Crochet would be the first big free agent of the group, and given the fact that he's only 25 years old, 86 with A potential, if he continues to simulate well, he's going to ask for $35, maybe $40 million a year, which is a lot. That's half of Miami's budget. So it's about being smart and figuring out, is that worth it? A 9-year, $360 million contract for a guy like Garrett Crochet, because ultimately that's what it might cost in the open market. Maybe you want to get ahead of that and re-sign him early, or maybe you want to trade him away early. Get some really good prospects, because, boy, his value would be quite high with a year and a half of team control, say, at this year's deadline. Let's go back to some of these young guys, though, in the farm system. Let's say you do want to call up Christian Campbell. You feel like he's ready to go. In real life, the Red Sox are putting him on the opening day roster, so I guess that's kind of fitting. Now, if you're going to call a top prospect up, my recommendation would be to play him as much as possible. There's no reason to rot him on the bench, so what we're going to do with Christian Campbell is we're going to play him every day. And if you don't think he's good enough to play every day, or at least as a platoon role, then why is he on your big league roster? He probably should still be developing, getting more reps in the minor leagues. Understanding how to manage your lineups, though, is also very relevant. Figure out who you want high in the order, obviously prioritizing on-base guys, then going for power in the middle, and then my key for the bottom is the number 9 slot. I do believe in the second leadoff hitter. I like having a pretty solid bat at the number 9 spot who can get on base for the guys at the top of your order. So I was able to slide Christian Campbell into the lineup pretty easily. I think he's ready to be a strong big league contributor. But with a crowded outfield, I don't necessarily want to rush Roman Anthony. So maybe it makes sense to keep him in AAA, at least for the first half of the year. And if he's playing really well, maybe you call him up. If not, there's no reason to rush it. Just keep him in the minors. As for the rotation, a little bit more simple. You probably want to throw your 5 best starters in the rotation. In terms of bullpen, my strategy is that I only like to have one setup man. I've noticed sometimes that the second setup man doesn't get used that often. So if you want him to be used, I would use him as a middle reliever. Let's talk about trades now. There's a few things we're going to discuss when talking about trades. But if you want to go for a more realistic franchise where roster moves are not necessarily you trying to rip off the other team, but more so a fair, evenly matched trade, this is how I would go about doing that. Let's say, hypothetically, we've made it to the trade deadline, and the Red Sox are having a good season, but you're looking for one more starting pitcher to add to the rotation. Look for guys who are on bad teams whose contracts are running out. Say a guy like Eric Fetty. Maybe the Cardinals are not having a good season, but he is performing well. I tried to find some trades for him. That trade would not be realistic. David Hamilton and Aroldis Chapman. It would make more sense to trade prospects, but not Marcelo Mayer, of course, because why would you do that? Sometimes there isn't a good deal. I wasn't able to work one out here with Fetty and the Cardinals. I looked at Arizona. Let's say the Diamondbacks are not doing so well. Merrill Kelly would make sense, given that, he's good. He'd be a good fit for you. He's on the last year of his deal. He's a free agent at the end of the year. And the Diamondbacks have some young arms in the rotation. The next thing you ask yourself is, does this trade make sense for the other team? It doesn't necessarily have to be, would you do it if you were them, but more so, is there rationale behind it? In this case, I think there is for the Diamondbacks. Let's say they're struggling at the deadline. They don't really need Merrill Kelly. They've got some young arms, such as Brandon Pfaadt behind him in the rotation. And 3 young C potential guys is pretty fair for a 36-year-old expiring contract, a 2-month rental. He's a good player, but it's not like he's a superstar. So personally, I would view that as a very fair deal for both sides. What I like to do, though, is make trades around the league. I talked about how to do this in the settings and sliders video, but I'll reiterate that here. Let's say you want to send Zach Eflin to a contending team. Maybe the Orioles are having a disappointing season. Well, this is how you would do it. You're going to move his notable stats down to 0. For pitchers, it's their per 9 stats. For offensive players, it's contact and power. Make sure to write down those stats, though, so you remember to fix it. From there, you trade some pretty bad prospects to get him. You fix his stats to whatever they were previously, and then you would trade him to the team that you want him to go to. Here, it would be Atlanta. And again, ask yourself, does this trade make sense for both sides? Atlanta's adding a big-time arm to the rotation. The Orioles are improving their farm system. And then you use the prospects that you got from Atlanta to trade back to the Orioles for the guys you traded away for lowly rated Zach Eflin. So that's how you would do it in terms of making trades around the league at the rest of the deadline. Another key during the deadline, if your team is mediocre per se, maybe on the outside looking into the wild card standings, you got to figure out, is it worth it to buy or sell? I think compared to the NBA and NFL, it's a lot easier for teams with less wins to go on playoff runs because baseball is so much more unpredictable. Let's say you put the 10th best team and the 20th best team in 162 games against each other. Here, it would be the Mariners and the Giants. The Mariners would probably win more than half, but they'd win maybe 86, 87. That's a fringe playoff team. Let's say the 10th best team in the NBA played against the 20th best team in the NBA for 82 games a year. I would guess the 10th best team would probably win around 50 games. You multiply that by 2 to get it to the amount of games it would be in an MLB season. That's around 100 wins. That's a big difference from the 86, 87 that we went over earlier. So I think because there's more parity towards the middle, the playoff series are shorter, and baseball is just less predictable. If you're on the outside looking in, but you feel like your team can make a run in the playoffs, don't be afraid to buy at the trade deadline if the price is right. But you can easily make a rationale to sell at the deadline if you're towards the middle of the standings. Let's say, hypothetically, a team like the Nationals overperforms and is around 500 at the deadline. Maybe you want to continue to sell. That team probably isn't going to go on a big playoff run this year, but maybe adding some more young pieces would propel them for 2026 and the future. Let's talk about gameplay now and sliders. Again, we talked about this a little bit in the settings and sliders video. But if you do plan on playing games, it's no secret that your gameplay sliders are going to be important. You're going to have to find out what best fits for you. I play on all-star hitting and pitching. I don't normally like dynamic difficulty, but if that's your thing, then be my guest. I have gotten some questions and seen people suggest the idea of being able to switch the amount of games in a season to where it would be less than 162 games, so you can play all the games and each game is more important. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in MLB The Show. That would be a pretty cool feature, but you have to play an 162-game season. It's really a matter of how many games you play. Some people like to play all 162. I think that's a little crazy, but all power to you. If you're someone who likes to play, say, in the big moments, then I think the custom game entry is a great option. What I like to do in the White Sox series is move the slider pretty far to the right, not let us go in before the 7th inning. This way, we're going to hop into around a third of the games, but we're going to play a lot of big, close situations or hunt for player milestones, and we can see some exciting finishes without having to play full games. What I tried at the end of the Giants series last year for the playoffs was moving the bar a lot closer to the left side. That way we could hop in and play the big moments of full games from the first inning onwards, but we still don't have to play the entire game and go through a long 45-minute to an hour process. There are so many different ways to play games in MLB The Show, whether you want to play the full game, do the custom game entry, but there's other choices as well. You can manage the full game, whether it's actually watching the game like a real manager or doing quick manage. There's also player lock, which I plan on using a lot more this year. I think it's a good way to use certain players, maybe new acquisitions, maybe guys in the minor leagues. And then there's retro mode, which is pretty cool too. We've gone over everything we need to before we start our season, but let's talk about some stuff during the year, including the MLB draft. This can be challenging for some. I'm going to talk briefly about the scouting process and the best way to maximize drafting high-end talent. So the Red Sox pick here at number 15 in the first round. We're going to simulate to our pick. I kept scouting on auto, and I don't think the scouts did a very good job. So let's talk about how to scout manually and how you can get yourself really good prospects. This is my strategy. Now, there are deeper scouting videos on YouTube. Scrawny Slugger, a good friend of mine, did a whole tutorial on this. So if you want to watch that, I would recommend it. But this is my basic strategy in terms of scouting. So we have 3 scouts that we can use per week. There are 14 weeks during the scouting season. So essentially, there's 42 different scouting opportunities that you have per year, whether it's scouting a player or a group of players, and I like to do a mix of that. Figure out what your scout's strengths are. In the case of Michael Weiss, he's good at just about everything. I want to focus on him scouting position players, specifically guys towards the first round. You obviously want to hit on your top draft pick. Let's take a look at John Madden. What a guy. Looks like a talented outfielder, 21-year-old college bat. Let's use Jorge Green to scout pitchers. And what I like to do with pitchers is scout by region. So for 2 weeks, I'm going to scout the West pitchers. For 2 weeks, I'll scout the Central pitchers, etc., etc. After the 8 weeks is up and you've scouted each region twice, you can kind of figure out which group you like, and you can continue to scout pitchers, or you can have that scout do something else. As for the third scout, I'm going to have them look to discover prospects. These are prospects who are not necessarily in the draft right now, but you can find them. They can be under the radar gems for you. So we'll simulate the week. Our scout is completed, or has pretty much completed his assessment on John Madden, and he looks pretty good. Definitely a guy I would be interested in the first round if he falls to number 15. In terms of the discovered prospects, we only found 1. He doesn't look that good. In terms of discovering prospects, let's say you discover, 20 to 25 prospects per year. A lot of them are not going to be very good, but all it takes is for 1 or 2 big hits for it to be worth it. So we're going to switch it from international outfielders to international infielders, and we're going to switch the potential first-round prospect to shortstop Tony Kazarian. I'm going to keep the pitching scout on starting pitchers in the West region as well. So that brings us here into week 3. We're going to make some more switches. In terms of the recently scouted guys with pitchers, we've gone through pretty much an entire region. We've gotten a lot of information on some of these guys. Steve Salgado looks pretty good. I'm going to switch it to the Central region now because a lot of the top pitchers in this class are from the Central. We have continued to scout some of these first-round prospects. Kenny Grimsley looks pretty good. 1 outfield prospect discovered, Pedro Guevara, fringe top 100 talent. Not bad for a guy no one really knows about. But I will say, I think we've gotten pretty unlucky so far in this scouting cycle in terms of discovering prospects. So let me go to the White Sox franchise real quick. I don't really want to spoil the draft class, but I've done some discovering, and I have found some really good prospects. I'm pretty sure all 3 of these center fielders who are not ranked by the MLB's draft ranking are guys who I discovered. I know for a fact Pedro Valdez was a player I discovered because then I did more scouting on him afterwards, and our scouts have him as a top 15 player. I don't want to bury the lead. I'm not going to say if I plan on drafting him, but given his potential ratings and given his draft rankings, he could end up being a gem who not many other teams are going to have their radar on. But you will, because you discovered him. Just because he's ranked highly doesn't mean you have to draft him too early. Maybe don't wait until the final round, but no one's probably going to have their radar on him in the 4th, 5th round, and you might be able to get him. Let's talk about minor league player progression before we wrap things up. Player progression is something that's very important to me in simulation sports games such as Madden and 2K. I've made entire player progression sliders for those games, but unfortunately those don't exist in MLB The Show. I think The Show does the best job in progressing players based on their production, which is a good thing. Guys who play well should be rewarded. Guys who play poorly should be punished. However, I don't think young players go up quick enough. A 60 overall with C potential and a 60 overall with A potential, I don't think they're going to progress that differently until they get into the 70s where the A guy is going to start to rise. So this last tip, you're going to have to do some extra work. I would say if you don't really care about player progression being that realistic, then maybe you don't want to do this. But if you want player progression to be as realistic as possible, such as myself, this is a good way to do it. So I would look at the stats of some of the more relevant minor league players across the league, along with some of the young major league stars. The example we'll use here is Marcelo Mayer. His numbers look pretty average, but minor league offensive production in this game is deflated. His 17th home runs were 7th in his league. That's the equivalent to Corey Seager's 32 homers, which is 7th in the AL, and now Mayer's number looks a lot better. 5th in OPS, that's equivalent to Yandy Diaz's 887. So when you compare that, it looks like Marcelo Mayer had a really good season, and because of that, I think he deserves to be rewarded as such. He got some nice boosts here, +4 contact against righties, +5 power. That's pretty solid, but considering he was one of the best hitters in minor league baseball, he drew a ton of walks, and he played solid enough defense at shortstop, giving him a pretty high WAR. I think his rating should be able to progress quicker. The numbers he put up in AAA suggest that he's ready to be a big league player, but his ratings don't necessarily reflect that. He should be a little bit higher than a 72 overall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at his righty and lefty splits. He was really good against righties, hit 278, but he really struggled against lefties, 165. So because of that, his ratings, specifically his contact against righties, should go quite a bit up. Against lefties, I feel like it should go down. 165 is pretty horrible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change some of his ratings based on his production. He now looks really good against righties, not so good against lefties. Plate discipline went up a lot because he drew a ton of walks. I think this is the best way to reward or punish players for how they perform in the minors or young guys in the major leagues. I plan on doing this in the Chicago White Sox series for guys on our team, along with across Major League Baseball. Let's look at an example here with Drew Gilbert, who's a good young prospect with the Mets, 4th in AAA in WAR. He's a guy I would give a big boost to. He's probably ready to be a big leaguer, and his rating should be closer to the high 70s than, say, a 73. If you do want to put in the work and do this, you got to figure out how many minor league guys are you willing to do. I cannot imagine it would be healthy to do every minor leaguer in the game, because you at home need to touch grass. But I would say some of the notable top prospects, maybe the top 5 to 6 guys in each team's system, go through their stats and change some of their attributes as such. If they had really good seasons, let them go up. If they did not do well, push them down. I think that's the best way to make player progression as realistic and as production-based as possible. It is unfortunate that you have to do all that manual work, whereas Madden and 2K kind of does it for you. But that's a fun way to make player progression more realistic. The last thing I'm going to add before we wrap things up is don't be afraid to get creative and try to add your own twists. With the White Sox series, I've brought in the wheel of random scenarios, doing fun things like that, whether it is a wheel like me. I'm using an app called Spin the Wheel if you're interested. You can do something like that. or find other ways to create unique storylines in your franchises. I think that's the best way to not get bored with it and continue to have fun multiple seasons in the future. Once things are ever changing with your roster, that's when it's most fun and most interesting to play the mode, when it's challenging but also realistic and rewarding at the same time. So that'll wrap up the episode. I hope you guys were able to enjoy this one, and I hope this helped you out finding creative ways to enjoy franchise mode more than previously. Make sure to leave a like. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more MLB The Show 25 content. Peace out.